In the city, there stands an old, towering apartment complex known as Crestwood Heights. It once had a grand reputation as a luxurious residence for the wealthy, but over the years, it fell into disrepair. Rumors of strange happenings began to circulate among the tenants. Stories of flickering lights, strange noises, and unsettling apparitions in the hallways became commonplace. However, the most terrifying tale was that of room 702, the room where a handicapped man named Mr. Vang once lived. Mr. Vang was a reclusive old man who had lived in Crestwood Heights for nearly 2 decades. He was paralyzed from the waist down, bound to his wheelchair after a tragic accident in his youth. Despite his limitations, he was fiercely independent, refusing help from anyone. He was known to be a quiet tenant who kept to himself, rarely seen outside his apartment. Some of the older residents would sometimes visit him, bringing food or checking up on him, but he often dismissed them with a polite yet firm smile. As years went by, people noticed a change in Mr. Vang. He became withdrawn, his once polite demeanor replaced with a bitter and hostile attitude. Residents would often hear him speaking to someone late at night. At first, they thought he was on the phone, but the conversations grew louder, angrier, as if he was arguing with someone who wasn't there. On several occasions, neighbors reported hearing banging sounds, like the clattering of his wheelchair slamming against the walls, accompanied by his enraged shouts. Then one night, the building's power went out for several hours. When it returned, there was an eerie silence in the hallway of the 7th floor. The next morning, the maintenance man, a grizzled old war veteran named Frank, found Mr. Vang dead in his wheelchair. His eyes were wide open, staring at the door as if he had seen something horrifying in his final moments. The cause of death was ruled as a heart attack, but those who knew him believed there was something far more sinister at play. After Mr. Vang's death, strange occurrences began to plague the apartment. Tenants reported hearing the squeaking of wheels in the hallways late at night. It sounded like Mr. Vang's wheelchair slowly moving, even though the hallways would be empty. Sometimes, the sound would stop right outside someone's door, as if the invisible occupant was listening. When brave souls would peek through their peepholes, they would only see an empty, dark hallway. One tenant, a young woman named Lily, recounted a chilling experience. One night, she was returning home late from work. As she reached the 7th floor, she heard the familiar creaking sound of Mr. Vang's wheelchair. Her heart pounded in her chest as she cautiously walked down the hallway. She glanced back and saw a shadowy figure in a wheelchair at the far end of the corridor. The figure did not move, but she could feel its eyes watching her. Without daring to look back again, she sprinted to her apartment, slamming the door behind her. That night, she could hear the faint sound of wheels rolling back and forth outside her door until dawn. Despite the rumors, Crestwood Heights continued to receive new tenants. Many were oblivious to the dark history of room 702. One such tenant was a young couple, Alex and Mia, who had recently moved into the city. They were excited to find an affordable apartment in such a central location, and the landlord conveniently omitted the details of Mr. Vang's tragic end. From the first night, strange things began to happen. Mia noticed the wheelchair in the corner of the hallway outside their room. It looked old and abandoned, its wheels rusted and its seat torn. She thought it was strange but dismissed it, thinking the building was simply neglecting maintenance. However, when she mentioned it to Alex the next morning, he was puzzled. He had not seen any wheelchair when they arrived. As days went by, Mia started to feel a cold presence in their apartment. She would sometimes wake up in the middle of the night to find the bedroom door ajar, even though she was sure she had closed it before bed. On several occasions, she heard the faint creaking of wheels rolling through the hallway and stopping right outside their door. Alex tried to reassure her, chalking it up to the old building settling or drafts, but Mia felt certain something was wrong. One night, Alex woke up to find Mia standing in the middle of the living room, staring at the front door. Her eyes were wide, her face pale as if she were in a trance. He gently shook her, and she snapped out of it, looking confused. "He was here," she whispered. The man in the wheelchair. He was right outside the door, watching us. Alex decided they needed to investigate. He had heard the stories from the other tenants, but he was skeptical. Determined to prove it was just their imagination, he set up a small camera in the hallway one night, facing their door. They went to bed, both feeling uneasy as the sound of the wheelchair creaking seemed louder than ever. The next morning, Alex retrieved the camera and played back the footage. At first, it was just hours of an empty hallway. But then, around 3 a.m., the footage captured a shadow slowly creeping into view. The shadow grew larger, and the faint outline of a wheelchair emerged from the darkness. There was no one pushing it. The wheelchair moved on its own, stopping right in front of their door. It lingered there for several minutes before slowly rolling back out of view. Terrified, the couple decided to seek help. They approached the building's elderly janitor, Frank, who had been working there for decades. He listened to their story in silence, his face grim. When they finished, he nodded knowingly. "It's Mr. Vang," Frank said. "That poor man died angry, filled with hatred and bitterness. He never left. His spirit is trapped here, bound to his wheelchair and this building." Frank revealed that before Mr. Vang's death, he had been involved in dark practices. He often spoke of curses and had a strange collection of old, dusty books filled with symbols and spells. It was said that he had tried to summon dark forces, perhaps in a desperate bid to walk again, but whatever he had called forth had claimed him instead. Desperate to be free of the haunting, Alex and Mia asked Frank if there was a way to cleanse the apartment. Frank warned them that Mr. Vang's spirit was strong, and the entity he had summoned was even stronger. If you want to rid this place of him, you need more than just a prayer. You need a proper cleansing. The couple contacted a local shaman, an elderly Hmong woman who specialized in dealing with dark spirits. She came to their apartment, bringing with her incense, candles, and a large silver bowl filled with herbs. The shaman began her ritual, chanting in an ancient tongue. The air grew colder, and the room seemed to darken as the flame of the candles flickered. Suddenly, the wheelchair in the hallway began to move. It creaked slowly towards the apartment door, its rusty wheels screeching against the tiled floor. The shaman's chanting grew louder, more urgent. The front door burst open, and a cold, dark wind blew into the room. The figure of Mr. Vang appeared, sitting in his wheelchair, his face twisted in a mask of rage and pain. With a final, guttural scream, the shaman threw a handful of the herbs into the air. The spirit of Mr. Vang shrieked, his figure dissolving into smoke. The wind died down, and the wheelchair clattered to the floor, empty and still. After the ritual, the atmosphere in the apartment changed. The cold presence was gone, and the eerie creaking of the wheelchair ceased. The building returned to its usual, dilapidated state, but the 7th floor remained mostly vacant. Few dared to rent the apartment, and those who did never stayed for long. Alex and Mia moved out shortly after, unable to shake the haunting memory of Mr. Vang's vengeful spirit. Crestwood Heights continued to stand, a decaying monument to its once grand past. And though the sounds of the wheelchair have stopped, some say that if you listen closely on a quiet night, you can still hear the faint creak of wheels rolling through the hallways, the last echo of a restless soul.